Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here with my review for the series premiere of Loki. This is literally the only Loki thing that I have. This really itty bitty little thing I got from Loot Crate years ago. So this is all we got. But it was a great first episode. I love what they did with it. I love the 60s aesthetic. I love the TVA. I love the fact that they're talking about the multiverse, and they even reference it's all these different timelines in the multiverse, and this it leads to madness, like the multiverse of madness with Doctor Strange, and of course Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch. So they're going to be dropping a lot of great hints, and I'm very excited to see how that leads into the multiverse of madness. If they're introducing a lot of this stuff, it does of course make me curious. Like if they're talking about all of it here, are we gonna get a surprise Loki? Because I don't think Loki's gonna get erased at the end of this series. I think what they're gonna do is somehow it's gonna be like, oh, you stepped outside of the timeline, and then I know that they technically know everything, and so it's like they know the beginning to end of everyone's lives. But I'm like, something weird's gonna happen, and they're gonna be like, okay, you can stay here. I mean, obviously that's what they do by the end of the first episode. Is that Loki has to fight? It's Lady Loki. It's definitely Lady Loki. So he has to fight this variant version of himself, and it's like, or another variant version of himself. And so I'm like, okay, it's already buddy cop mode. Going into it. If you haven't seen some of the stuff in the trailer, they show bits and pieces and stuff like that. But he's in a very unique position because we've had Loki from kind of. I think this was Avengers 2 or something like that. But we've had Loki for quite a while now. We've had him for nearly 10 years. And so we've had him, we've seen him grow, we've seen him, lose his mom, lose his dad, actually bond with his brother, all these different things, like 2.5 minutes of Infinity War and whatnot. And then we go all the way back to classic evil Loki. And then he has to see everything that happened after that, and he's like, wow, not only do I amount to nothing, I'm like the side character that's like support for all the cool people. And so it was really interesting because I'm like, okay, he sees that he becomes a good guy, but he still hasn't lived those experiences. He's sad, he loses his mom, he loses his dad, he loses his life. He amounts, in his own eyes, that whole, I'm meant to be a god and lead and all this stuff. He, in his own eyes, from his original kind of Avengers 1 definition, he amounts to nothing. And so he's still that guy, but he sees what he had become. So he's in this very unique middle ground, and I'm excited for how they're going to write that, because there's a lot of stuff with his character where we can see him, and he's even confronted by Owen Wilson. I'm never going to remember the character's name because he's going to be Mobius. Never mind, I got it. It is a sweet name, so I'll probably remember. But he gets confronted, and it's like, I don't like hurting people. It's kind of a ploy because I feel weak and I want to look strong. So he knows deep down who he is. He knows that deep down he's Thor Ragnarok Loki. But he's still young. He still didn't go through all those experiences, and I'm like, he's in a very interesting position. He can't use the Infinity Stones, which I thought was really cool. Because they're like, oh, we use them as like paperweights around here. I thought that was great because that's exactly what it's like in the comics. The Infinity Stones do not work outside of their own universe, and I thought that was super cool because the TVA is like outside of universe. It's kind of like in between the universes, or it's kind of its own universe, I guess. So I like the way they did that. I thought that was pretty cool. And so it was like, wow, this, like my goal was to like work through the Infinity Stones and all this stuff, and it meant nothing. Like it like all of this was pointless because ultimately you can just chuck them and then just have a trillion of them. It's like, oh yeah, we just toss those bad boys around. They look pretty, and we just put them on a desk. And so then he sees the timeline, and it's like, is this the greatest power in the universe? And I'm like, that seemed like classic Loki to me. Like there's something where he's still scheming, and of course he schemes a bit in this episode. And so he's going, through the natural motions, and he still does his classic escape. He goes through all the stuff of seeing the death of his family and seeing his own death and all these things. And I'm like, seeing it ain't living it. So he's moved up a little bit on the notch of like evil to good. He's kind of slid a little bit, but he didn't go all good yet. So I'm excited to see how they play around with that throughout the series. And I think there's going to be some point where he confronts the variant version of himself, and they're going to be like, I'm already a variant, and I've wiped out a buttload of other, teams that have come after me. Why don't we just team up? You want to lead just like I do. That's all we have to do. So there's going to be some interesting moments there, and of course he's going to still ultimately choose good, but he could choose bad. Who knows? It's going to take some time before he officially decides like, all right, I should probably be the good guy 100%. And then somehow they're going to end the season. It's going to be like, surprise, you're meant to be in the timeline this whole time. Or something really weird. Like something's going to happen where he's allowed to stay, or at least, stay as part of the TVA. So he can still show up. We might see Loki. He can just pop up anywhere they want him to now. Because I don't think they're going to kill him off, because it's Loki. So I'm excited to see how the rest of the series plays out and, where things ultimately go. But I love how they handled it. The introduction of the TVA, the explanation. Everyone loves Miss Minutes. So that was super cool. They did the classic, kind of old school 60s animation style of Rocky and Bullwinkle references in there. When we actually see the TVA and, like, the weird city that they have, it was like Star Wars meets the Jetsons, because all I could think of was it's Cloud City mixed with Coruscant mixed with the Jetsons. That's all I could think of. And even the literal scene where they show it, where like the way the camera was tilted and everything, and they're walking past like these open spaces, I was like, that just makes me think of Empire Strikes Back when they walked past the windows on Bespin, which technically was only in the special edition, but that's what it made me think of. It was like they were technically like, it was flipped because they were coming towards the camera from right to left instead of left to right. And I was like, that just makes me think of Star Wars. And then it also looks like Coruscant. So it's like, it made me think of Coruscant. It made me think of Cloud City. And then, of course, with just like it was definitely the fact that they had like tall spires, and then they would have like the bulbs in the middle, and then the spires would keep going. That's the part that made me think of Jetsons, because I'm like, that's how it was, in the Jetsons, in the far-flung future of 2004 or something. I think the Jetsons was like 2004. So I was like, oh, that's weird. It just makes me think of Star Wars and the Jetsons, which the Jetsons, of course, being that old show, and this is having that 60s aesthetic, it almost makes sense that it made me think of the Jetsons. But I loved it for sure. I like the style of it all. I like the way that they show how the characters speak like all different languages and stuff like that. They only showed it with Owen Wilson and the other guy, but I would assume that's a fairly common trait where like those people who possibly live for a super long time, because even Owen Wilson was like, time works differently here. So I'm like, he could be centuries old and we wouldn't really know. So I like that idea. Like, these people have all sorts of knowledge and speak all sorts of languages and stuff like that. They had the thing early on during that exact scene where they referenced that, where the kid looks at the painting, and I was like, Mephisto! And I thought that was the funniest thing. Like, I'm not the only person that make that joke, but it was just funny. I'm like, I wonder if that was before WandaVision, that was already a thing, or if they just did that on purpose and it was just like, like the devil did it. But I'm just like, that's hilarious, because it's Mephisto. But they do also make an interesting reference to another person that was brought up a ton during WandaVision, which is Nightmare. And they reference when Loki's like, I'm going to burn this place down, and almost is like, well, I'll take you to my desk and you can start there. And then when he says, this place is a nightmare, almost is like, well, that is another department, and I'll actually help you destroy that. And I was like, depending on how they ultimately give out this answer, this could be one of the like difference. I mean, there's so much crazy stuff, it's comic book, so it's like you have timelines and then multiverses, and that's another thing that they may or may not need to explain. I've seen some people talk about that where it seems kind of confusing, like, well, is a timeline a different universe? Because if they take the Infinity Stones out, then they shouldn't work, and things like that. So I think the way that they're kind of explaining is that timelines exist within one universe, but if you have too many timelines in one universe, it begins to affect every multiverse. That's how I kind of see it, because like with Wanda's children, that wouldn't be, I mean, I guess technically it could be an alternate timeline, but at some point it's just a straight up different dimension. Like, there's have to be some variations that are so huge, it's just its own thing. So I think that's kind of how they're going to explain it. Like, eventually there are so many different timelines that it starts to branch out into what is known as the Omniverse, which might actually only be a DC thing. Everybody's got multiverses. It's complicated. Point is, I think they're separating. I think if there's too many timelines, then it affects the multiverse. So either way, I'm sure they're going to explain it a little bit better as we kind of go forward. But I like the way it was handled so far. I'm very excited for episode 2. I really want them to just be like, it's Lady Loki. I just want to see the like full costume design. That's what I'm most excited for. Like, is she going to look like she does in the comics? How are they going to handle it? I've heard that there's another actor that may or may not be like the older Loki, which I thought was interesting, because there's a guy who didn't show up in this episode, and I didn't even know that. So I knew that there was like a woman that hadn't shown up in this episode. I was like, okay, so she's definitely Lady Loki. And then I saw that there was a guy, and so he might end up being older Loki. These could also just be random other characters that just show up later that are important, but they have nothing, they aren't other variations of Loki. But I'm almost 100% sure that the woman is Lady Loki. Like, even the stature and stuff, I was like, That it could be a small man, but I was like, I think that's a woman. I'm pretty sure they're doing Lady Loki, so I'm excited for that. They also make a reference to God King Loki. Once again, there's a million variants, but I thought that was interesting because Loki even says it's like, God King. They probably reference a million things that I missed, but they also reference my favorite one was definitely the robot thing. For me, I thought the first thing I thought was LMDs, and so those are people that are made as robots. But if you've seen Agents of Shield, you already know this. But for people who totally missed out on that, it is amazing. I'm telling you, just like watch a recap on season 1, start at season 2, and you'll be fine. Like it just gets better every season. I know people don't believe that, but it's so good. Ghost Rider, so good. I'm telling you. Anyway, they do a whole season where it's just like, who the F is real? It's a lot like the Scroll stuff, where it's like, is this person a person or is this person an alien? Except it's robot instead of alien. And it's a really great season because you're just like, I don't know. Who is this person? Are they going to turn evil? Are they under someone else's control? Are they just help? Are they a villain? Like, what is happening? There are a million things that can happen with LMDs. And that's what I thought of. I was like, that's super funny. It was like, are there people who are robots that don't know? LMDs don't know. So that's cool. There's also Doombots, and they're made kind of in the same vein of LMDs, where Doom will make it, and it's like they just assume that they're actually Doom. But I thought that was great. I was like, LMDs, epic reference. So I just love that scene where I'm like, that's cool. That's really funny. Like variant LMDs, and then they're just like, bloop, and they're just blown up. Even though I assume everyone gets erased anyway, which is really interesting. The way they make it seem in this show is that they put them on trial. So clearly some people don't get erased, and that's the interesting thing. That's what I really want an answer for, because they put people on trial, but the whole first episode, outside of Owen Wilson, everybody's just like, drop a bomb, reset this shit, hit that person, erase them, I don't care, just wipe everything out, let's leave. That's how the whole first episode went. Yet within like the first 10 minutes, it's like people go on trial and they can somehow not get erased. And so I'm like, well, what is the answer when they're not seen as guilty? Which they still saw him as guilty because he was like, well, you guys should talk to the Avengers. They're the ones that were hopping around. It's like, they were supposed to do that. Oh, but I'm garbage. Okay. All right. So I thought that was funny, but that was interesting. They didn't really touch on it in that first episode, except for him, just barely escaping because of Owen Wilson. But I'm like, if they have a trial, then there are definitely times where they let people go. So I'm curious if we'll get to see that a little bit later on. But I love the first episode. I love the comedy in it too, because this was him where he was like at the height of his like rage and everything, and then he was brought down. He was at like 100. He just got beat, so he was already dropped down to like 10, and then they took him down to like -20, where it's like, do not touch my leather, and then they just lasered it off. It was like, take a ticket and all this other stuff, and it was just really good. I was like, it was really interesting to watch him kind of be weak, even though he's still at this really cocky phase. But I'm like, it kind of makes sense. Like, we didn't really get to see much of his character outside of, I'm meant to be a villain. We never saw him deal with any opposition in those first moments, so it kind of makes sense that we'd still see that, because it seems weird, because it's like, oh, he was always like the big bad villain, but ultimately we never saw him actually deal with anything in the first couple of Thor movies, or even in the Avengers. He was just like, I'm meant to lead, and I'm the big bad villain, and that's it. We never saw him instantly, lose, and then he's just like, what the F is this? There's no magic, there's no this, there's no that. Like, none of this I've ever heard of, and he's, if he's the same age as Thor, about 1,500 years old, and he's like, this is all new, and it's just like confusion and weakness. And so I was like, it kind of makes sense. And he was still trying to do the cocky thing, like when he's like, I'm guilty of this, and he's like, why want this? Like, there were a lot of moments where I was like, this is really cool. He was definitely trying to do his stuff, and he pulls it off for sure. Like, I love the scene when he threatens the guy about gutting him like a fish, which he doesn't know what a fish is, which means I assume he was born in the TVA, which is very interesting. Still weird that he wouldn't know what a fish was. As Loki mentioned, it was like you work at a desk, like, so what? Like, you literally deal with alternate timelines. You never figured out fish. You got not power stones, that's a video game. Infinity stones all over that place, but you don't know fish. That is still weird, and Loki was definitely accurate on that. But I enjoyed the way it was handled. I'm very excited for this series. I wish we had multiple episodes out at one time. I really wish that they would do these like Netflix. They'd be so much more enjoyable, admittedly, than a lot of the Netflix stuff. I'm like, I want to see this way more. I want to know what happens in WandaVision all in one weekend. Falcon and Winter Soldier, all in one week. I'll binge it. Everybody would, but of course they need that money. They need to draw it out. Let subscriptions keep rolling over month by month. I completely understand. And I think we only have 6 episodes total for this. A lot like Falcon and Winter Soldier. So I'm excited. We should be getting some decent length episodes. I think this first one was about 50 minutes or so. And it was good. I'm definitely excited for it. They also have a little thing at the end of the credits where they have Miss Minutes say, like, thanks for stopping by the TVA. Tell it, let us know how we did. So in case anyone missed that, there's like a very tiny thing for anyone who didn't stay after the credits, which makes sense because it was the very first episode. I wouldn't expect like an after credit scene episode one. They don't even show it. It's just the voice, so that you don't actually miss any visuals. But I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. They just threw it in there at the very end, like, hey, thanks for visiting us. Tell us how we did. So I thought that was cool. Tara Strong. If you don't know her, I don't know how. That's insane to me. But you've heard her voice. She's Timmy Turner. That's all I need to say, really. But she was also Harley Quinn in the Arkham games, and 1,800 other things. She's everywhere. I guarantee you've heard her, and you just didn't know. I didn't even realize it was her. I don't think I've heard her do like an accent like that before. So I was actually surprised. Like, oh, that's her. I knew she sounded familiar, but I was just like, when I saw the name, I was like, dang, she can do everything. It's ridiculous. Voice actors. But I love the first episode. We'd love to know what you guys thought about it. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. Obviously, when it comes to the Marvel shows, the big thing is theories. How is this going to affect the overall universe? What are they going to do by the end? Where's Loki going to be by the end? I honestly think he'll be a part of the TVA, or something super weird is going to happen. They might even show, I forgot the time people, the gods of time or whatever they actually call them. I forgot. They might even show them. Who knows how crazy it's gonna get? We're already dealing with Lady Loki. We might get old Loki. I'm excited. I like they're gonna do some stuff I expect from the comics that I'm actually like super excited for, because they're finally dipping into the multiverse stuff. So we get to see variations. We get to see different new costumes from the comics. We get to see possibly some new powers, like some new moments from all these different variations. Now that they're doing multiverse, they can be like, oh well, Loki has like this insane level of power in the comics, but when it comes to the movies, a lot of the characters are definitely kind of dumbed down. So they could do some of those crazy godlike moments, because it's like, oh well, this isn't our Loki that we're used to. And it's like, oh, we've never seen him do something so strong. I just give it to the other variant, and it makes sense. It's like, oh well, they can do that. That's cool to see. So I'm excited. It gives them a lot more potential. So looking forward to this series. And like I said, we'd love to know your thoughts on this first episode, and of course theories in general for where we're headed with the multiverse and the TVA and whatever versions of Loki we end up getting. Do you guys think we'll get any special appearances? That's always like the big thing in these shows, is like, oh, who's gonna show up? We like Mephisto and all this madness and all the other stuff. I would love to know your thoughts, if we should expect any very special guest characters or anything like that. So please put your comments down in the comment section below, and of course, thanks for watching.